Describe yourself a little in terms of, your history as to how you got to where you are and the position you are and with the company
Sure.
and what your roles are at this point and what they have been in the past.
Okay. So my current role is I'm the supervisor for the Toyota technical training group within product quality and service support. I supervise a team of course developers. We develop curriculum that is ultimately delivered to the dealership technicians in three primary areas. We have our core curriculum, our core training. We have our new model, and we have our high-tech training. Um, I've been with tech training. I've been with Toyota for almost 15 years. I've been with tech training for about 13 of those. And I've held all those positions, the new model developer, the core developer, and the high-tech developer over the years. I also spent 3 years in Japan with technical training as the liaison between the TMC tech training side and the United States tech training side.
Great. So this is a good question for me as, 3 months, 3.5 months in as a course developer. We're doing adult education and specifically for technicians like you mentioned. So besides what we learn in formal education, what are some of the characteristics you see, particularly about adult learners that we deal with?
So our audience specifically, the technician is our main audience, and I see the majority of them tend to be visual learners. They tend to like to do hands-on activities, and I'll talk a little bit more about later how we develop our training to address that. But they tend to be visual. They tend to be a very wide range of experience. When I first started in training, we typically had our very seasoned, very experienced technicians coming into class. But nowadays we tend to see, especially at the entry-level classes, we tend to see anywhere from someone who's never worked on a car before to someone who has quite a bit of experience tinkering on their own. So we get a wide variety of experiences from our technicians, and they tend to be very busy because they're adults and they're living their lives, as opposed to a full-time student or somebody who's still in school. So it's sometimes difficult to capture their attention and keep it because of that, because they're thinking about the bills they have to pay or the kids they have to raise or something like that. So for our audience, they're very visual, very hands-on,
Yeah,
and very
and
busy. They're busy
I
guys.
tend to see that as an instructor when I was, we're out in the field instructing, the attention factor, especially like you mentioned. Uh, they're
Yeah,
adults. They have a lot of things on
absolutely.
their mind for sure. Uh, so
Yeah, exactly.
what would you say the setting looks like when a Toyota technician or Lexus technician comes to training? I mean, what's that training environment like?
So we have, on the Toyota side, we have 12 regions throughout the country. They each have their own training center within the region office. There are some satellite training centers as well. They all look pretty much the same. We typically have what we call a quad, which would be 4 service stalls in the workshop attached to one classroom. And the training would be a combination of training inside the classroom and then training on vehicles and with actual parts in the workshop as well. Um, all the training centers have dedicated facilities, so they have their own special tools, their own lifts, their own special equipment to do the type of training that we need to do. That's when technicians travel to do instructor-led training. When we do e-learning, which we do quite a bit of, um, that is delivered via our learning management system, which is online, and technicians are free to take that wherever they can access the internet. So a lot of technicians take it at the dealership. I've heard a lot of technicians say they do it maybe during their lunch break or during slow times at the dealer. Um, but that environment is obviously quite a bit different than the instructor-led environment. So we try to make sure that we keep those e-learnings possible.
For already mentioned that they're busy and they're busy at work, but they get a chance to be self-directed, so they can if do it outside of work if they have to, which also to your point, I guess, is if they have to do it outside of work,
Yes,
it shouldn't
absolutely.
be a super, long 2-hour e-learning or going to lose them.
Yeah, yeah, that's something we always try to keep in mind is that we're a training organization. We're not necessarily an education organization. So we try to focus on building new skills instead of trying to train them from the ground up and giving them a whole background of every subject we teach.
So tell me a little bit about the course development process that?
So we try to be consistent with our course development process for obvious reasons. We want a technician in Cincinnati to get the same experience he would get in Los Angeles or anywhere across the country. So we have a development process that usually begins with a needs analysis. So we go out and we talk to technicians, we talk to other folks in the product quality group that are seeing field concerns with our vehicles. We try to gather as much data as we can to decide what content should be in a course if we're building it from the ground up. If we're updating it, of course, we seek out that input on the latest and greatest or what needs to be changed, what technicians are actually facing in the dealership. Because again, we're not teaching them from the ground up. We're trying to teach them what they need to know and just that much. So we start with the needs analysis. It's very important when developing a course for us to develop really strong FSPs. We call them final student performances. I believe that's used throughout the education industry, that term. But that's a list of, at the end of this course, what do we want the technician to be able to do? And that's really the foundation of our course. And from there, we flesh that out into an outline. You need to have a really strong outline of the course and how you're going to meet those final student performances. And the process, it's more or less the Mager process. So Mager has been out there for years and years. Our process is slightly modified from that, but for the most part, we start with that foundation of final student performances, and then we make sure moving forward that every single worksheet we do or activity or PowerPoint slide goes back to one of those final student performances to make sure that we've met one of those, met our objectives. And we also, like I mentioned just a minute ago, we try to involve the field. We have development teams where we will involve the field in advising us and drawing on that expertise to try to figure out how to make the best course we can.
Okay. So the methods that we use in developing training and that how we deliver it vary. So what are some of those tools?
So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our training is e-learning nowadays. If we have content that is knowledge content, not necessarily a hands-on skill, we'll typically deliver that via e-learning. The reason for that is both cost and time. It's easier to get the content to the exact technician we want it to in a timely manner, and the cost is lower than having to have a technician travel to a training center for some learning, have a hotel and meals and all of that. So we do have e-learning. We still have a lot of instructor-led training. Most of our core training is instructor-led, and that would be in the training centers that we talked about earlier. The instructor-led training consists of a mixture of PowerPoint slides, worksheets out in the workshop, instructor-led demos. We have a lot of different ways that we do it. And actually, each training center has dedicated training vehicles. For some of our courses, we install what we call bugs or problems in those vehicles. So that gives a technician a real-world experience of finding out what the problem is with the vehicle in a controlled environment. We also use training simulators. We have an engine control simulator to teach them about engine controls. We have hybrid simulators to teach them about how hybrid power flow works in the powertrain. We do instructor-led demos. Something I've found with instructor-led courses is that it's important to leave some time for discussion within the technicians because a lot of times these technicians in the instructor-led courses will come together. That's the only time they interact with other technicians from other dealers. And actually a lot of learning, in my experience, takes place through that discussion where they talk about they're learning about a particular subject. And one guy says, oh, I saw something like this, and another guy says, oh, I saw it differently, or I fixed it differently. There's a lot of organic learning that happens between them if you allow them some time to have questions with the instructor and to talk back and forth amongst themselves. In general, I'd say that because our technicians are so hands-on, so visual, we try to get them out in the workshop as quickly as possible. We don't want to sit them in the classroom for long periods of time and have them just staring at a PowerPoint. So depending on the course, we typically try to target 70% workshop, 30% classroom as far as the mixture of PowerPoint or just instruction versus hands-on experience.
Yeah, so I think your point about leaving time in the course to let the technicians speak about these things between themselves is part of the design, and it's something that we need to always think about. So that's a very good
Absolutely,
point.
yeah.
Great. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I just have one final question for you. I know I gave you some questions ahead of time and we didn't hit them all, but as far as training and development once you get into this atmosphere? What do we do as developers and instructors to further our professional development? Is there things we can do within the company that we work for?
Absolutely. I can speak to Toyota, obviously. They're very good about supporting their folks as far as trying to develop their skills and what they do. Internally, we have seminars. We call them Bill Heacock seminars because Bill Heacock is the instructor that all of our developers go to. There's level 1, level 2, and then there's a kind of a one-on-one discussion during an actual class. And they're designed to teach how to develop courses. They teach the process, basically, how to create training from the ground up. And the nice thing about them is they're away from the office typically, so our developers are able to focus on that process, learn that process well. They actually practice doing some development while they're there. There's other organizations like Toastmasters we talked about a little while ago that can help with the public speaking portion, because part of our developers' job is to deliver our content to the STSs who then deliver it to the technicians. So public speaking and being confident to deliver content is very important, so Toastmasters can be helpful for that. There's also organizations like ASTD, Association for Talent Development, that are out there, and that's an industry organization that's a training organization, and they offer seminars and classes. There's a lot of resources there that we encourage our developers to take a look at to help just round out their skill set.
Great, great. I think they've covered it all, and I really appreciate you doing this with me and having this conversation. Plus, I get to ask you the questions I don't get to ask you during the workday because we're all running 10 different directions. So
that's right. Well, thanks so much, Rich. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it.